Nintendo.
Hello everyone, today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite games, Animal Crossing. Since the Switch 2 is right around the corner, I'm assuming like others that the possibility of the next installment in the Animal Crossing series being for the Switch 2 is quite strong, so I've been thinking about the next game. Because even if I'm wrong and the next game isn't coming out soon, there's definitely going to be one at some point, okay? Unless Nintendo are super dumb. So the way this video is going to work will be a bit more of a ramble than a properly structured piece, although I do have notes. And for the video itself, I'm going to put a few clips of my New Horizons island, as it's the only footage I'm able to get. I hope it will be cohesive enough, and do remember that everything I say is really colored by my own experience with the game and is in no way like a fact or absolute truth. I'm certainly not immune to nostalgia. Anyway, let's get into it. While Animal Crossing New Horizons made the franchise explode in popularity back a couple years ago, my first Animal Crossing dates back to when I was like in 6th grade or something with Wild World. I still remember back then, my twin sister and I were at my neighbor's house just so briefly, and we saw her whip out her DS, and on it was Animal Crossing, the French version. And we were so intrigued by it, you know? Of course, it was immensely appealing. And I can't speak for my sister, but to me at the very least, when I heard my neighbor explain the concept of it, I was like, oh, I want that. Back then, of course, we had to like beg our parents to get new games, and we didn't really get them often. But eventually, I did get my hands on it, and I was able to explore the world of Animal Crossing on my own. What interests me is people often say the first Animal Crossing town you have will define at least some of your favorite villagers, and I'm not telling you all this to be nostalgic. I'm gonna come back to this later, I promise. But yeah, in my town, I had Victoria, an absolute slayer, my bad bitch Roscoe, and the squirrel named Static that I remember specifically. The inside of Victoria's house with like the outdoor style with the ranch feeders and the grass carpet and the starry sky wallpaper is like permanently engraved into my mind because I've been there so many times. And of course, while I am fond of Static, some people may already know this, but Roscoe remains one of my all-time favorite villagers, and I even have his amiibo card, like, oh what? So I ended up playing very frequently, of course, the way you're meant to play, that is day by day, with some occasional time skipping, I'm sure, as I'm not above that. Animal Crossing became a game I loved a lot, and since then I've played every major release that came after. My dad bought us City Folk for the Wii when it came out, and you know what they say about peoples with Wii. While I did play it well, it was certainly the game I played the least due to its lack of portability and the fact we were only over there occasionally. Later, when I got my 3DS, I bought New Leaf with my own money. And of course, I played New Horizons as well. It's actually the entire reason I bought a Switch in the first place. So I want to preface whatever I'm talking about next by saying I thoroughly enjoyed every single iteration of the game. I loved the simplicity and yet surprising detailed game Wild World offered. I loved City Folk too, since it's pretty much the exact same game, and New Leaf's graphics and the way it expanded on the game were well enjoyed too. And as much as people like to criticize New Horizons, it did offer a lot of new things in the Animal Crossing series that I enjoyed, although it was through the sacrifice of others. And that's what I wanted to talk a bit more about today. Before we dive in, I wanted to mention what I think New Horizons did right real quick. The resource and crafting system, while not perfect, did breathe a breath of fresh air into the game and give a lot to do for the player in terms of DIY collecting, crafting items, and more. It's also the first main Animal Crossing game to allow you full player customization. Did you know in prior games you couldn't pick your skin tone? Yeah, they had like a tanning system in the summer, but they couldn't include darker skin tones or black hairstyles. Fortunately, New Horizons did improve on that front. The graphics of the game are of course amazing, the colors are vivid, and I love how versatile the camera included in the game is. The town progression system is much stronger than in New Leaf, and there are clearer goals to work toward for people who felt lost without them in prior games. So yeah, there were many great things about the game. But today we are not here to sing the praises of New Horizons. Let's talk about one of its main criticisms, the super boring villagers. When people generally look back at the franchise, many long-term players say that New Horizons feels like a hollow shell compared to others, with its predecessor, New Leaf, being a big favorite to mention. It's true as well. The villagers repeat their dialogue incessantly, they basically just suck up to you constantly, and a lot of defining features of the game that in my opinion gave it a lot of personality, such as Rossetti or Gracie, had their roles diminished or straight up removed. But let's go back to those villagers specifically. The thing is, I vividly remember playing New Leaf as a teen and thinking to myself, is this villager repeating dialogue? And yeah, the villager was repeating dialogue. So why was that the case when everyone lauds the game for having such complex, fleshed out villagers? Well, it's because it's not always related to repetitive dialogue that existed in New Leaf already. When I was a child playing Wild World, I don't think I ever once saw repeating dialogue. In New Leaf, like I said, I did occasionally, and in New Horizons, I did frequently, like on a daily basis at times. And yeah, that is a big issue, but it's not the only issue that makes the villagers boring. New Leaf is miles better in terms of villager interest than New Horizons. So let's go ahead and figure out why and move on from the repetitive dialogue points, because I think everyone acknowledges it. The villagers in Wild World and New Leaf stand out in contrast to New Horizons for other factors as well. They simply felt like they had more personality. So for everything I'm about to say here, I don't know like the code or inner workings of any of these games. The stuff I have to say is based purely on my experience playing them, okay? So first, it felt like within every personality type, there were subdivided areas based on that particular villager's hobby. For example, when I played Wild World, I remember Apollo, who lived in my village at some point, being super into fossils as well as being a cranky villager. He was always out and about with his shovel, walking around, asking me shit about fossils or just talking about them in general. Some villagers who were into gardening constantly had flowers around their house and were always watering flowers around the town. Note that this is different from the beautiful town ordinance introduced in New Leaf. This seemed much more attached to the villager itself rather than a town policy. And honestly, while revisiting New Horizons this week, I did see some villagers lean towards certain activities. For example, Chief was always singing his head off and he clearly has an interest in music. And villagers like Sprinkle and Lucky clearly love running and fooling around the island. However, even then, I felt like the hobby system in New Horizons didn't come across as strongly as in previous games, especially in Wild World. For example, many jocks are interested in fitness, but I can see literally any other villager in my town doing yoga or lifting weights. Like apparently Julian has a music hobby, but I'll still catch him lifting weights at home. Of course, they're not limited to only having one activity they like doing, but it still feels like it contributes less to their individuality. Another thing is that their hobby doesn't always extend into their requests, dialogues, and reactions. I'll admit this may just be nostalgia making me feel this way, but yeah, to me, in New Horizons, the hobbies seemed almost neglectable compared to how they were in the previous games. A second thing was, Wild World as well as New Leaf had great relationship progression, something which does exist in every game but is extremely diminished in New Horizons. You could really feel the villagers treat you like a stranger at first, then slowly warm up the more you spend time with them. And I felt it wasn't attached to town progress at all, but rather how much you interacted with them. In New Leaf, the villagers were not as mean from the get-go, but it worked similarly. Yet, honestly, from my memory, I'm almost certain that in New Horizons, the villagers treat you like God from the moment you step into their presence. Yes, the villagers in Wild World could be mean as hell to you sometimes, but that's what made them feel alive. Ultimately, every game has some kind of friendship level existing, granting you more and more possibilities and culminating in getting given their portrait as a token of the friendship you have with them. But the starting point in New Horizons is already too friendly and it doesn't feel rewarding at all. A final thing I wanted to mention was that Wild World and City Folk, since they're very similar, also gave more personality to the NPCs in the town through the inclusion of episodes. So what these were like little dialogue events between the characters working in town, such as the Able Sisters or Tom Nook, that would kind of flesh out their characters. Each character had a multitude of episodes each that built upon the previous one, and they weren't easy to get either. You had to fulfill certain criteria, then they'd play on very specific days if you went to see them. Now, if you look online, it's quite easy to look these details up right now and get all of them, but as a kid playing, you had no idea how it worked, so it felt so organic in the way it breathed life into the NPCs you saw every day in the game. With all that said, I hope y'all understand why New Horizons felt so much duller to me. Alongside the repetitive dialogue, the limited individuality, and the pullback on imbuing life into the community, there's another important aspect to discuss. Let's take a closer look at New Leaf in particular, as although it is held in high regard by the community, it is also, in my opinion, one of the main contributors to the issue of lifeless villagers in New Horizons. When New Leaf came out, it of course iterated on the formula, but it also introduced something that, in my opinion, is a major change. In prior games to New Leaf, you play as a villager just like everyone else. In New Leaf, you are the mayor. And yes, you are the mayor because town progression is a crucial part of the game. It is one of the main appeals of the game, just like crafting was for New Horizons. But do you know how that changes things for the player? In prior games, we're equal to everyone else. You feel just like a regular person living in a small town. In New Leaf, you have the responsibility thrust upon you, and suddenly the devs introduced the concept of control to the player. Now, before New Leaf, players always sought to personalize and decorate their towns, for example, using patterns to create paths. New Leaf is no different, and to this day, you can still find beautiful towns designed by users from New Leaf and Wild World alike. But New Leaf also gave players the possibility to do more. You could build public work projects, which ranged from simple decorative things like benches and fountains, functional ones like bridges, and this goes all the way to the large buildings like the cafe, or like the police station. At that point in time, New Leaf provided much more customization and control over the town than any other game in the franchise, and people loved it. And so did I. And we all wanted more of it. I have like the distinct memory of people complaining so hard when they made their beautiful New Leaf town with all their paths and the like, only for a villager to decide to move in and plop their house right in the middle of said path, ruining the design. This was a really common occurrence that people did not like, and people even made memes on it, right? Why can't we choose where villagers live if we can choose where everything else goes, you know? It was just this sort of thought that wasn't so much of a complaint as much as a wish for more. So New Horizons came out and gave everyone just that and everything else they wanted. Yeah, you can place your villagers' houses wherever you want so they'll never bother your path again. And why not your museum too? And also all the ramps and the bridges. And of course, what about changing the landscape to your liking entirely with terraforming? How about changing the interior of your villager's own home? You get it, right? You've played the game. Everyone knows New Horizons gives near full control to the player when it comes to their island. You're not mayor anymore, but you're in charge of renovating the entire island. And you know what? People loved it. This is exactly what people, I included, wanted, and the devs delivered. And many people were really happy with it when the game was new. Me included. Like, just look at how decked out my island is. Of course I loved it, and I still love it to this day. The only problem is that when you give so much control to the player, you remove agency from those living in your island, that is, your villagers. Let's circle back to what I mentioned earlier. New Horizons have the most hollow, boring villagers the entire Animal Crossing series has seen until now. Well, yeah, of course they do, because they aren't meant to be here to be your neighbors or friends like in the past games. They're here to be part of the renovation. Yes, the devs could have put more effort into their dialogue. Let's not forget they ditched updating the game after like a year or something ridiculous. But the issue here lies with the fundamental design of the game. And I can't blame the devs for making this design choice because based on previous games, it seemed like that's what the players wanted. Did players know it would come at a cost? No, like it's not the player's fault for ever wanting more out of a game they love. But I'm just pointing this out to emphasize that, to me, this is just what happens when you place so much power in the player's hands. Remember when I said that your first Animal Crossing town kind of gives you your first few favorites? I'm almost certain that those who made New Horizons their first game and that joined during its peak immediately got sucked into the hellhole that was Dreamies and popularity tiers and the entire market that sprung up from it. Do y'all remember those Raymond and Boxes memes? Anyway, all this to say that while I'm certain many enjoyed New Horizons like a normal game, the hype and design of the game itself made it so that the villagers themselves became commodities, the exact same thing as objects you traded or placed around your island to fit its aesthetic. Hell, they're even listed on Nookazon, and I'm guilty of trading villagers there too. My point is, it's incredibly difficult to have a town where your villagers act like real people with distinct personalities, when you have the ability to just go in there and choose whatever they get to say or wear, decorate their houses as you see fit, place their house wherever you want, as many times as you want, redecorate inside their houses, and more. Hell, you can even force them to stay forever on your island if you want it. Like, low-effort dialogue aside, the design of the game itself lends to the villagers appearing like decorative pets, and it really does suck once the hype of designing your island is gone, because the reality is, unlike most of its predecessors, New Horizons feels so much more like an island customization, decoration, and progression game, rather than one focused on community and relationships. That doesn't make it a bad game, it just makes it a different game with different goals. Of course, New Horizons has other issues. Lots of features already available in the previous games were added in way later, the main shop still only has one major update, and a lot of fan-favorite NPCs had their roles entirely removed, like I will never forgive the post office and its pelicans being replaced by a postcard rack. But let's finally get to the point of the video. In the next Animal Crossing game, I want them to address the issue of control versus agency between the player and the villagers and the NPCs you're trying to foster a community with. Everyone enjoys the ability to customize their island, so I don't want to see it removed, but I do want villagers to feel like people again, with their own lives, interests, and choices. I'm not a game dev, so I don't know how to fix this or how to strike a balance, but it's the thing I want the most. I don't know if there's a way to achieve it, but I'm certain that if they put their minds to it and if they make it their priority, the devs can find a way to strike that balance. Just on the top of my head, I feel like even if all the control the player was given stayed in the next iteration of the game, it would add so much if the villagers were just given the ability to choose for themselves. If you ask them if you can move their house, give them the ability to say no. When someone's in boxes about to move, give them the choice to insist on leaving. Yes, it's sad to see your fave go, and yes, it's annoying to not have things go your way in terms of your island design, But that's just how life is, and if Animal Crossing wants to go back to emulating it, villager agency is the number one thing that needs to make a return. And I feel like a hypocrite while saying this because in my footage, I literally tell Francine to stay on my island because I don't want her to go. But like, players cannot help using these options if they're given the power. Maybe there should just be something there for us to work harder for it. Like maybe if we have their portrait, they won't go. I'm certainly friends with Francine, but I don't have her portrait. So upon realizing this, if she had left, maybe it would have made me work harder to solidify my friendship with the other neighbors in order to make sure this doesn't happen again. You see what I mean? Another idea is maybe say, if terraforming does stay, villagers can comment on it in a way that isn't always positive. Maybe they hate the way you patched up the little pond next to their house, or maybe they think your full brick bridges and ledges are ugly as hell. Like, let them have opinions and have a say in what's going on. Currently, the villagers do comment on stuff around the island, but it's always positive. They'll just say something like, wow, I love this stool you placed here, amazing. It's just like, and what's the point, you know? Maybe they can give suggestions and their suggestion is like, not exactly what you'd like. Like, what if one of them wants a moat around their house and you're like, sure, I guess. But when you do it, you're rewarded with special dialogue, a boost in friendship, and more. You get what I mean, right? Or like, what if we go a step further and villagers themselves offer to terraform part of the island for you? Sorry, some of these ideas might be ridiculous. I'm just like throwing them out here. Again, I'm not a dev. I don't really know the solution for this. Anyway, I think I've gotten my point across on this one. Again, I'm not saying the devs did nothing wrong in designing New Horizons because they just gave the players what they wanted. Of course, they phoned it in on many aspects of the game too, but even if the villagers were given more dialogue and they continued developing it for more than a year, the fundamental design of the game would still have left the game feeling hollow, in my opinion. Now that I feel like I've insisted on that point for ages now, I want to talk about other things I want to see in the future game that are marginally related to the topic of imbibing life and community back into the game. First, I'd love to see the return of NPCs providing services to you. Take the post office personnel mentioned previously. Yes, the postcard rack is faster and more convenient, but the town feels more alive when you have to go through the process of talking to someone to get a service done. It's like so typical of our current times to want things done quicker and without inconvenience, but I don't think Animal Crossing is the game for this. It's meant to be smaller, more slow-paced, so I want them back. The ability to do many things without talking to anyone in the town strips away a lot of the community in the game. And honestly, this applies to real life too, but this is a video about Animal Crossing, so I'm not going to get into that. Next, I mentioned Wild World using episodes to bring a sense of life into the town and its inhabitants. I would like to see those make a return. Think about how much more exciting it would make daily activities in the game and how it would feel to see that these characters have lives and concerns of their own. I think it would also benefit them to introduce new personality types in the game. However, I would much prefer them spending time on fleshing out character dialogue or maybe even introducing episodes to the villagers themselves. Imagine if certain combinations of villagers triggered certain episodes, wouldn't it be cool? And it could be individual villagers or it could be villager types. Say, imagine randomly you end up with 3 jocks on your island, but if you have 3 jocks on your island, it triggers an event where all of them form like a sports club where every morning at a certain time you can see them working out together. It would be really nice for them to have these little interactions with each other that show that they are also in a community. I also think that it would be nice to see the villagers interact with each other more instead of just interacting via you or making you part of their interaction. So currently, the main interactions you would see is either the 2 characters talking to themselves directly, waving to each other, participating in activities together, or asking you to deliver something to another, or gossiping about another one. But half of those options include you. Like if one of them wants to gift another an item, they ask you to do it. If they gossip about another villager, they gossip about it to you. Anyway, moving on. So many people complained about how the devs dropped New Horizons so quickly, and while I wanted to say I also want the devs to commit to the next game more, instead of that, I think I'll say that I want the next game coming out to be able to stand alone for a long time without the need of a team constantly updating it with events. Just put all the events in the game, flesh it out fully, and give us things to do properly. I think that's much preferable because it's the way the games prior to New Horizons have worked, and they have had much more longevity than it for sure. And I know this is not just an Animal Crossing issue, it's like a gaming industry issue in general, but yeah, a girl can wish. Last but not least, I have a few superficial desires for things being in a future game. First, in relation to shops and items, the shops need to get upgrades they deserve. Just one upgrade is honestly pathetic, and we need characters like Gracie with their luxury collection to be there. You know, like bring back some value to some items. And on the topic, I also would like them to make the furniture and clothing interesting again. It's boring to just have the same items in like 7 colors or whatever instead of the very niche collections they used to be part of. It just lacks flavor, just like everything else in New Horizons, honestly. Personally, I want them to bring back the Lovely series and the Sweet series. But yeah, another thing that lacks major flavor in the game is the music. Like, how come all its predecessors has iconic hourly soundtracks that evoke such strong memories in players, but New Horizons is just like that? Like, it's not bad, it's still nice, it's just not memorable. And if I recall, you don't even unlock hourly music until a certain point in the game. Like, please don't do that again. I have a last, very random request for the next game too, and it's just, I want bridges over elevated heights too, like over cliffs. That's it. Like, I don't need the ability to build them, I just want them to be more than just for crossing rivers. Alright, I've been talking for quite a while now, so just to wrap up, what are you guys' thoughts on all this, and what do you guys think will come for the overall concept of the next game? Animal Crossing has historically been in a small town, and New Horizons brought us to an island, and I saw speculation about the game being more city-based next time. I personally don't know how I feel about that unless it's like city folk, but it is just speculation, so who knows. For myself, I think I'd like them to return to the small town concept because I feel it would lend itself best to that feeling of a lively community I desire. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much to everyone who stayed and listened to me ramble about Animal Crossing for God knows how long. It's a series that, while not my all-time favorite, is one I love a lot, and I want to see future games from it encapsulate what I loved from the previous games, and not just rush towards being a designing and decorating sim. I want to feel like my favorite villagers are as full of life as ever, and the town is not one I possess entirely, but that I share with others, because that sense of community, now more than ever, I feel is important, even in just a game. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!
Na